budgeting for children. My name is Colin Sorono, and this is just the beginning of the conversation that we are starting on budgeting for children and what the budget means for children. Remember, yesterday, the Minister of Finance, Mr. or Ambassador Kuriatani, announced the 3 trillion budget, a 3 trillion budget in Parliament. And we want to break down this information. What does this 3 trillion budget mean for children? Because sometimes when we see big figures, we want you ask questions. How does it translate to what next mean? So to help us in this conversation, we have guests from different sectors, and I will ask all of us, maybe starting from my left, to introduce ourselves. Please just mention your name and the organization you represent.
Thank you very much, Collins, and for all those who played a role in organizing this. My name is Samuel Munyewin. I work with African Institute for Children's Studies. We are a Kenyan and Pan-African organization too, working on knowledge management and capacity building on matters of policy research on children. We also convene a network of civil society organizations called Children Agenda Forum to largely advocate on the rights of children. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Jennifer Kaberi. I work with Total News. Total News is a child-focused organization it's child-centered organization that focuses on child participation and ensuring that children are not forgotten. We actually say to making children visible, and especially when looking at the conversation for today, we're looking at budgeting, but how do we make sure that children are visible in the budget? So that's why we are joining this conversation. Thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Annette Nyeluma, public finance management practitioner, and I also work with Haki Jamii as a program manager.
Good morning. My name is Paul Elijah. One vision was secretariat control forces about children. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. That is Mr. Elijah Bodo from the Joining Forces Alliance. And remember, this event is brought to you courtesy of the Joining Forces Alliance. We have the Africa Institute of Children's Studies, and we have Total News, and we have the Children Agenda Forum, who are part of this coordination and planning. So let's go straight to this conversation, and I'll begin with Mr. Samuel from this end. Samuel, just give us a brief. Yesterday, when you heard about the 3 trillion budget, what came to your mind?
That's a good question. So, of course, I think as most Kenyans, we all consumed with the thoughts about where is that money coming from and where is it being invested in. Of course, in my constituency around children, is to also ask ourselves, what is a priority? I will imagine the same way I will do my budget in my house. For many families, when you're starting off, you will think about the infrastructure like housing, and I see the government putting a lot of money on that, roads, railways, and all that. But equally, we spend a lot of money on people in terms of children, education, health, the things that make us human. And so I immediately want to check how much money is being allocated for empowerment of families. Who is going to benefit out of this? We have a country, for the economic terms, we talk about the Gini coefficient, the difference between those who have money and those who do not have. If one person owns all the wealth, then we are not well balanced. I think I'm very conscious that our Gini coefficient is at 0.4, meaning that we have almost, for every one person who has money, about 4 of us don't have. And that is a risky thing, because what it means is many families there are still not able to buy food on the table. And so the kind of investment that we are making today, is it really translating into that? And maybe as I just wind up on immediate, my broad thoughts is, I also know that whenever you're doing an investment, even as a country, we do what we call a program-based budget, meaning there are certain priorities that we have done, and we have done them too in the children's sector. There are things that we know if we do correctly, then our children will be better. And these are the same people who will be employees when they turn 18. So we're investing according to those plans, and maybe in the part of the conversation, I'll mention some of those priorities we need to do. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Let me ask Jennifer a different question. Jenny, when you see all this happening in Parliament, what do children at home understand, or what does it translate to a child who is watching probably at home in the village? They're watching TV and they're seeing the finance minister going to Parliament and making an announcement that Kenya is releasing a budget of is making a statement of a budget of 3 trillion.
You know, the thing is, I work in the media and I work with children. So the first thing, the thing is, when you come to budgeting, children become second-hand consumers of budget information. Like whatever the budget news, they are going to consume what their parents are getting. For example, if a parent in the house says, "Oh, lolo, 3.4, what trillion? Huyu mtataka kutua," you know, that's exactly what the child is going to understand, that the government wants to kill them because of the amount of money. So it is very important for policymakers, when you're giving these statements, remember your consumers are not only adults. Okay, so make when you're, especially when you're going to say things to do with children. For example, if it's education, I saw they are allocated over 500 billion Kenya shilling to education, for example. What does that mean to children? So when you say that, the children will go like, "Oh, that's a lot of money." Anybody with a child, they know when they have 10 shillings, they feel like millionaires. So you can imagine they're hearing 500 and something billion. They think there's a lot of money in this country, and I can't understand why we don't have books, we don't have pencil, why we are leaking classrooms, or we don't have classrooms at all. So it is important that you start thinking as a policymaker, how can you make this very simplified for children so that they don't start consuming second-hand information. And you start wondering, why do children hate us as policymakers? They hate you because their parents hate you. You know, so it is important to start thinking on how can we make this information consumable to children, because they are also citizens. They are 46% of this country. The population is 46 below the age of 18 years. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Annette, you are in public finance, and when the public hears that there is this budget, what comes to the mind of parents?
Yes, thank you so much for that question. For instance, what happened yesterday, we saw the reading of the budget, and the budget that is about 3.3 trillion. And so when we hear of this budget, what parents want to see is what is in it for us. What are we going to benefit as parents and even our children from this budget? So it's basically in terms of access to information. Many people want whatever is in the budget to resonate with their needs. So when we talk of needs, that cuts across different sectors. In this case, we are talking of education, we are talking of health sector, and under health sector, children would want to see how are they going to be able to go to government hospitals, for instance, and get medication there. How is this going to translate into maybe them going there and accessing high quality services? When you talk of education, my sister has mentioned about the classroom aspect. You ask yourself, when I take my child to school, are there classrooms? Are there teachers? So that is what the 3.3 trillion budget. That is the kind of thinking that the common man has out there. So when normally we see the budget being read, you'll ask the common man, what are your expectations? They will tell you tunataka ushuru upunguzwe, tunataka tuende hospitali na tupate madawa, all that. And the same applies to even children. They would want to ask questions such as, especially during the COVID pandemic, what we have seen is that there has been inequality in terms of access to education, for instance. A child would ask themselves, during this time, there are those who are able to access education because of online learning. But how many Kenyan children were not able to access education during this period? So what is the government planning, especially with this in this budget, to ensure that access to education is for all? So basically in that line.
All right, thank you very much. I think I'll now move to Mr. Elijah Bonyo. You see, during when the parliament, when budget is read, they go to the minister goes to parliament. Now, how do we ensure that every child gets to understand a budget like this and gets to understand what is there for them? Because ideally, because they were consulted, if they were consulted in the budgeting process, then it means that the government should make sure that they also understand what has been allocated to them. How do we go about that?
So clearly, if you are not consulted at planning, it's obvious they already left behind. So I think this is one of the things that perhaps we need to correct. Listening to the minister, the Secretary of Treasury yesterday, again, he didn't make any statement around how the public were consulted in a manner that we would see children being appreciated as part of the public. So yes, public participation is important, but in this case, I think for the last 4 years, the children have not been consulted, and therefore their views are not being taken into consideration. And if government is taking views of children into consideration, what we need to see is evidence. For example, we have over 22 million children. So what proportion of these children were consulted? We'd love to see government saying that out of the population of children in Kenya, we've consulted 5% of them. And let the Tribune say that between the age group of 10 and above, consulted 10%. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Bonyo. Mr. Bonyo, I think I'll stick with you because I was asking when maybe children are consulted or not consulted, is it important for the cabinet secretary to make sure that children get an easier version of the budget for them also to understand what is there for them?
Okay, I just want to go back to, I think Jennifer raised this, the issue of access to information. You know, children access information through schools. And when they're being taught in primary school or secondary school, already there's good content that they can comprehend and understand. So how to ensure that children access information? The approach is already there, and that is the school system. But we hardly see children being given information around policy, around the laws, around budget in school. So if the school is a sure way of ensuring that children get information, if the school's teachers are not giving the information around budget, then clearly the children will not get it. Now, what the National Treasury does every year, they issue a Mwananchi version of the budget, the citizens' version of the budget. And the citizen version of the budget, even what we saw yesterday, is still in English. And I'm not sure whether it was meant for citizens who understand English only. And the content that is that citizen version is not friendly to the children. So we still have a gap. And I think for me this morning, what the National Treasury needs to do very quickly is to use the same energy, the same effort they made to develop the citizens' version of budget, to quickly develop the child-friendly version of budget. And a number of agencies are willing to work with Treasury on this strategy.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Bonyo. And before I come back to you to break down the budget or what you understand about the budgeting process, let me ask Jennifer, how can we involve children in the budgeting process, or even how can we get them understand what has been allocated for them? For example, yesterday the CS announced the budget, but there's a high possibility that majority of children don't know that even the budget was being read yesterday, or even what is there for children. How can we make sure that that happens?
I know, because I'm in school, that you learn math from the age of 5 years old. So that's where you start. That is a good entry point of teaching children how on budgeting, okay? And it can be, right now with the CBC, it's called CBCC, the CBC, yeah, CBC, the CBC curriculum. It's very parental, it's very involving. It's just giving them, when you're growing up, there's something they used to call general knowledge, okay? It's just having a general knowledge, and like go find out how much money your school is given or how much money you spend. It's just starting as small as that, okay? And at very young age, I think age appropriate, of course you cannot you start telling a child all these big numbers. It's from a very young age, start teaching children accountability. Okay, in this school, we get this amount of money from the government, and this money is used for A, B, C, D. What would you want next year for the government to do? How much for the government to pay? Okay, and I'm sure if we start from that young age, we'll start eliminating corruption. Okay, because sometimes corruption happens because people don't understand how this money is gained, one, and how it is spent. Okay, but from a young age, you can start very easily. Like for example, this budget, as Bonnie said, it's not child friendly. Leave alone child friendly. It's not even citizen friendly. Okay, when they say they are going to build this number of classrooms, where are they going to build them? Okay, how much is the cost of one classroom? Okay, so that's something I'm asking. Okay, and then is that as a child I'm asking, are they going to start constructing a classroom? Because when they say that. Okay, so but when you start from that stage, you're going to start from today as government. We work with Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development to develop very simple tasks that we can include in our curriculum from a very young age. For example, how much money is allocated to our school, and then we can go how much money is allocated to our community or our ward, how much money is allocated to our county, how much money is allocated to the nation. That way, children will start understanding this money, and this is where the money comes from. Okay, we do not dig the money from the trees or wherever. This money is gained from taxes. And what are taxes? I'm sure by the time the child is getting to tax, they know that for you to work, that's why you don't complain. That you not start complaining. Oh, all this tax. Whatever, because from a young age you've already been made to understand for you to pay for these services, you have to pay tax. So if someone is paying these services and they're not, or if they have something, they'll start asking questions. That's where accountability is put inside the child system. So they start asking these questions. For me, I think there is a way, very simple, age appropriate, and as they grow old, they can be able to be be taught longer and longer. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Jennifer. So, Mr. Bonyo, most of the time, most people, I think, the public don't understand maybe the budgeting process. Most of us probably see the CS coming on TV and presenting the budget, and we think that is where it all started and that is where it ended. So, just break down for us, where does the budgeting process start and what does it involve?
Thank you, Collins. I think that's a very interesting one. What was happening yesterday is basically a stage in the budget process. So ideally, the budget process starts sometime around. For example, let me give it from August. What happens? The National Treasury issues a circular by the end of August. Now that circular stipulates what happens at what stage and who's involved. As the National Treasury issues the circular, the guidelines for the budget for the national government budget process, the county treasuries similarly do the same for county governments. Now you begin to see anyone who is really interested in being part of the budget process, then as early as September, you need to start engaging. What happens is that a financial year of government ending June 30th means the first quarter of the next financial year, the government ministries, departments, and agencies should be documenting their annual reports, the previous financial year, that shows what they have getted and what they expected about. So what that means that as they develop their annual reports, let me just try and make it simple. As they develop their annual reports, they begin to prioritize the budgets for the next financial year. In September, October last year, ministries were developing annual reports for the financial year 2019-2020. As they were doing that, they're also prioritizing for financial year 2021-2022. So they do that within the financial year, which is the current financial year. So once they do these sectoral reports, there's a requirement that they're supposed to undertake sector performance review. Now, sector performance review is basically trying to make the public appreciate that we have some money and this is what we did, this is what we spent with the money and this is what we achieved. Now, that's an opportunity for citizens to begin engaging. The challenge we have is the sector processes are so much at the national level, so much, let me make it so much at the city, to the extent that my grandmother, somewhere in some part of this country, who is a citizen, has no way of engaging the sector. Right? So the opportunity around budget making, which is the first quarter, is available, but it's not so clear for the public to engage. Now, once we are done with the budget making process, we move to budget approval. Now, budget making process is largely the executive function. Right? The budget approval is largely the role of Parliament. Now, before we saw what Treasury was doing yesterday, around some time in February, the CS presented the National Budget Policy Statement to Parliament. What that means, it was basically setting the priorities that resources will be allocated for, and then it was also allowing Parliament to set the ceilings for sectors. So as that happens at the national level, the county governments are equally able to what we call the county fiscal service paper. So some of these things, it's easier to explain it when you have more time. But then, after the budget policy statement is approved by Parliament, then Treasury goes back to continue the making around February, March, the detailed estimates. And those detailed estimates were taken to Parliament again by end of April, I think that in April, for Parliament now to begin looking at them. So between April 30th to yesterday, the budget documents were already in Parliament. So whereas people are waiting for the minister to come and read the statement, ideally what the minister was saying yesterday, and if you listen to the statement, there's places where he was saying, I propose. The reason why you say I propose is because he knows he doesn't approve. So the people who approve is Parliament. Now in Parliament, once the approval is done, then we go to budget implementation. So budget implementation begins on July 1, when the financial year begins. So as the budget implementation is going on, we also have to associate that with the monitoring implementation. And then, so as the executive now takes it to that stage of implementing the budget, Parliament has the responsibility of oversight. So we begin to see that the executive implements, Parliament's oversight. Then after implementation, then the budget audit comes. So it's a cycle. So clearly, in the next 2 months, the budget process for the financial year 2022-2023 will begin. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bono, for that elaborate explanation. Let me go to Annette. Annette, Mr. Bono mentioned something about public participation. What does public participation entail, and where do children come in public participation?
Thank you so much. And to answer that, I'm also be posing a question. That is it fair for the policymakers or the people involved in the development of the budget to go ahead in the development of the same minus half of the population of this country? Jennifer mentioned that children in this country constitute about 49%. That is almost half of the population in Kenya. And the definition of children under the Children's Act is any person or human being under the age of 18 years. So clearly we are talking of half of the nation who expected a lot in the budget reading of yesterday. And to also answer the question again, I would say, when you talk of public participation, one of the things or important to note is that it's a process, and it's not just a one-off event, because that's what many people assume. And it's a process that involves a series of activities and also affords stakeholders, including the children. We are talking of half of this nation being children, including stakeholders who are children, to be able to influence decisions that affect them. And decisions that affect them are divided in so many sectors when we talk about the budget. And so when we talk of public participation, it takes so many aspects, so many forms. For instance, we talk of informing, because even for that child to make that informed decision of this is what we want, basically they expect that the government informs them of what, gives them information of what the situation is. Today we are seeing COVID-19 pandemic, how it's affected our children. And so they expect that the government informs them and also gives them option and also solution. At the same time, it takes a form of consultation. And in consultation is trying to get feedback and the views from the public. In this context, we are talking of children. It talks about involving the most important persons to ensure that in terms of development of decision criteria, they have a stake in that. It also includes collaboration, and when we talk about collaboration, which is a key component in terms of budget development process, what we are saying is that the public has a stake, at the same time the government also has a stake in ensuring that the public views actually reflect the outcomes that are made in the budget. It also involves empowerment, and when we talk of empowerment, it reflects more on Article 1 of the Constitution, which speaks on the sovereignty of the people, to ensure that the final decision-making actually is given to the people. And so when we talk of that, the question we are asking, when we look at the 3.3 trillion budget, the question we ask ourselves, does it reflect the will, or does it reflect the needs and priorities of the children? So that is quite important. Then we also have, in talking of public participation, it's not only public participation, but we call it effective public participation, which takes so many components. And one of it is citizen voice, the children voice, to ensure that genuinely they are given a platform to voice their views, and the views are taken into consideration while the government is making the final decision. We also have the issue of feedback, which is really one of the things that has created citizen apathy in this country, where people are called for public participation by the government, but we are gotten to a point where we interpret it as a mere formality, because we go, participate, give our views, but we never get feedback. The government is not able to give us an account of how that information that we share with them in terms of priorities and programs that we want in our areas or in different sectors reflect the final decisions in the budget processes. So there's a lot. And today I want to speak, when we talk of public participation, in terms of inclusivity. And when we talk of inclusivity, what we are saying is that the process, the budget making process, actually gives audience to the widest stakeholders, who include the children, to also be able to give their views, and the views are considered at the end of the day.
All right, thank you, Annette. I want to go to my left, Mr. Samuel, from what you lead the Children Gender Forum. And one of the objectives is to make sure that children participate in policy matters, and things like budget. Have you ever participated, have you ever been involved in ensuring that children participate? And what was the outcome? Was that participation considered by Parliament or by the stakeholders or the institutions concerned?
Thank you, Collins. Well, I must emphasize that participation is one of the most important gifts or right that we give ourselves in the new constitution. And participation is not therefore something that you beg. It needs to be provided for. But also, like any other thing, today if you are asked to maybe describe an space program, and you've never known anything about it, there's very little you can do. So it has to be meaningful. And so to answer your question that, is it ever considered? Personally, I presently engaged in draft strategy that affects the health of children, adolescent health strategy. And we did have step processes where we actually consulted the children and asked them, what are some of the priorities? And I must say that while the document is not fully ready, we were able to directly pick some of the things. I'll give you an example. The young people are saying, while you're talking about rape or defilement, you are not being sensitive to the fact that even between girls, there's defilement happening, and the way you planning your programs is not happening. We need to be sensitive to, other things that are coming up, homosexuality and all that. And they're saying, can we therefore be able to address this? So in brief, I would say, yes, I think there is willingness, but to what extent all those ultimately translate into funding? Because even like it is at home, you will know what is most important for people by how much money they put on it. So it goes back into, are we able therefore to put the money in what is being prioritized? And so I think what we need to do differently, and maybe the question we should all ask ourselves, so is it all done? It's 3 trillion budget, it has been read for what? Is there an opportunity to reprioritize it? And like Bonyo said, the approval process is ongoing. Began with the Parliament, of course, began with the financial the policy, but now it is possible to reallocate according to what is most important. Can you influence your member of Parliament and say, while this allocation has been done in this way, it needs to be put in this other way, but can we also structure how we involve children and even parents? I think many of us, meetings are called for engaging in the budgeting process by the county government, by the national government, and very few of us attend. And then we complain about what comes out, what has been prioritized. So as we plan the meeting platforms, the town hall meetings, the barazas that we're going to be having, those ones for children who will be trained on what it involves to do a budgeting and what they should expect and demand out of it. Thank you.
But also, Mr. Samuel, when you talk about maybe people are being called to participate, But the question we should be asking, and they don't go to participate. Now the question is,
Children are saying mental health is a big issue. They are depressed, they are stressed. Okay? How much money allocated to mental health? Universal healthcare is not limited to equipment. That's what I'm bringing here, to free maternal health care. Not for the elderly, okay, to COVID-19, okay, to Kenyatta National Hospital, to Moi. Universal healthcare is holistic. WHO define health as not absence of disease, but a holistic thing, and it is inclusive to mental health. So children have been saying over the last 1 year they want mental health care in their schools, in their communities. Why are we not providing that? Okay, as a community, why is it not being provided for in the budget? Okay, thank you so much.
yeah, probably Jennifer, yes, you've been able to engage with children in Kenya and across Africa since COVID-19 started. Okay, so how have you been presenting those views to the responsible bodies or
Yes,
offices?
yes. Like for example, when the government of Kenya was doing, they wanted to the school thing. So they started a little committee. They called for views on education COVID-19.
The opening of school.
Yeah, it was opening of school. I think it was COVID-19. It was not. They were not really into opening. They wanted what should be done with COVID-19 and education, with support from I think joining forces and Save the Children specifically. We did have a forum or two, and we had views from children. Okay, and we did a memorandum, and we sent it to Sarah Ruto's committee. And after that, Sarah Ruto called us. They told us to bring the children, it was virtually, for them to hear from the children directly. And when the CS, Professor Magoha, read the final report, we could see some of our recommendations in that report. Okay, so yeah, we have seen that, and we told the children, actually, your views were included. So they have also we've been involved in a couple of development of policies where we have seen children views included in those processes. Yes, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. So, Mr. Bodo, Jennifer said that she has had an instance where children's views have been considered by government. Probably you could explain to us, are we doing enough in terms of child participation at our organization levels before we start looking at government?
Thank you. I think I want to go back to what Annette was saying. Whose responsibility is it to facilitate public participation? Now, children are participating in their own households as they engage with their parents. So parents are facilitating participation of children in the household level. You know, within the community, we have schools. So teachers are facilitating child participation within the schools, and of course, including boards of management schools, right? So the spaces where children are, most of the time, are within the households, community, or schools. So there are already mechanisms for facilitating public participation in as far as children matters are concerned. So in my view, the duty bearer is government. And if you are going to improve on public participation, government must first of all develop a national child participation plan with clear targets on how children will participate in planning, in budgeting, in policy making, and even legislative matters. Because civil society have been facilitating public participation, but they're doing that because government is not doing it. Civil society is facilitating child participation because the government is not doing it. So there are a number of lessons, like Jennifer said, that have been documented by a number of agencies that can then need to be scaled up by government. And those approaches are effective. Jennifer has given a very good example of how children views were documented and inform the COVID-19 education response plan. So already we have that example. So I really think that this is an area of improvement, and I can tell you, because the budget being read yesterday did not provide for resources for child participation, clearly the next 1 year, there will be no child participation because there's no money for it. The county governments, their part, the general government done that. So are we saying that we're a country where the next 1 year we can now begin to say that children participate, but the support for child participation is not? I think that can be corrected. And why I'm saying can be corrected, the schools are available. We only need a child participation plan that will facilitate participation through schools based on the already existing resources frameworks in schools. But Collins, I also think that as we talk about this budget issue, there's something around where we are coming from. There's already investments that were made to certain priorities. So sometimes I'm at a loss why we are being cushioned by various programs. The government is saying social protection is cushioning people, but when they're coming to speak about the next process, they're not talking about how many people are cushioned. So it's important that as we get excited that this has been allocated, we ask ourselves, 2018, the government said your social protection program cushioning people. 2019, that was said again. Employment creation, we have jobs being created. Why are we not getting government saying that over the last 4 years, this was the investment, this is the result, so that as you propose what you want to spend, you are telling people, you can imagine 2018, 2019, 2020, how much have we invested? Has there been value for money? So it's important that even the public needs to ask these questions. So as we have discussed around budgeting, let's not forget the previous investment.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Lakiponya. So remember, you can also engage. For those watching on YouTube and Facebook, you can share your comments and your questions via those platforms. We'll be able to read them and ask our panelists to answer them. And also, we have the audience here. Please feel free to ask. If you have a question, just keep it. We'll give you an opportunity to ask your questions and be able to engage in this conversation. Let's go to the next level. Mr. Samuel, the budget was read yesterday, and some of us have been able to follow this process from the beginning and maybe to yesterday. Do you think that the government considered the right priorities in terms of budgeting for children, especially? Were children well prioritized?
Good question. And while it's sometimes difficult to say that, for example, if you invest in water programs, then children are not considered. I mean, that will not be correct. But overall, I think what is critical here is to ask ourselves, building on what Elijah just talked about, if you're going to do, say, social protection, ideally, I think we should be reducing the number of vulnerable groups with time. In a good sense, with as the year go by, we should spend less on that because we have empowered more people. And so if I was going to check on to what extent then is the budget being responsive to children's rights, is to ask myself, are we investing in programs that ensure every child is safe, is able to survive, is able to develop, is able to participate, just within what we have in the Convention on the Rights of the Child. When you look at a lot of the investment that we have done, and let me take you back to what plans that we made as a country in the past. What are our priorities? We all can access the National Plan of Action for Children, 2015-2022. And there are certain priorities that are listed. We need to see that our healthcare system is able to prevent children dying even before they are born. So what sort of investments are being done when they are born? What sort of investment is being done? And when you look at even healthcare, it's taking a share of one of the lion's share of budgets. There's still a lot of need to be done at the community level in terms of community health, being able to respond to the needs of children. And if you ask me, I think that is still an area where we do have we need to be able to respond faster on that. Issues of birth registration. We know now chiefs can do a large part of these processes, but can we ensure that you don't go there and you're told, we don't have certain materials, we don't have certain equipment, so that these are a very critical part that make you able to even register for schooling. So I want to point out one area which I think is so critical for us. We say a country is known for how developed it is by how much it takes care of the weakest people in the society, the most vulnerable. And on that, it requires that if today my child is lost, and we are seeing a number of increasing cases of children who are lost, they can't be traced back home, or homicide issues and such matters. If I reported this matter, where do I report? Would it be the chief's office? We have a country that is so dependent on volunteers. You have one county with about 1 million people with just 2 children officers. Really, how are you going to respond to all these cases? And how much money are we putting in such? Because we need to also remember that when we respond to a child who is most vulnerable, a child who is in the street, you protect many more others. Because the vulnerability to many things that are being recruited into from groups is much higher because you did not respond to their needs. So I think we need to now, at this stage, really review where have we put money. We have almost 1 billion being allocated to child welfare society. Really to ask ourselves, how do we spend that money in a manner that the most vulnerable children, I'll give you an example. In Nairobi, statistics from National Bureau of Statistics, we only have 3,500 children who live in the street. It's possible to put money for foster care and be able to remove these children this month, place them with foster families. Of course, there's a process that is required of rehabilitation, and ensure that the whole city does not have children who are living in the street. What is the net impact of that? How many more investors will feel confident coming into Nairobi because we don't have children who are in the street? So I think we want to now be able to audit the budget and check whether that 1 billion that is allocated to one agency, or the money that is allocated to the Department of Children Services, actually will make sure that next month we can see phone calls being made and people being mobilized to support such.
Right, thank you. Jennifer, no, this must be disturbing to you as a parent. We always we've seen so many children getting lost and just disappearing, and some of them we find them dead, as Samuel has said. And you realize that Interior Ministry is one of the ministries that is heavily budgeted for. What's the problem when we already have a ministry that is heavily budgeted for, that is supposed to get up for to ensure that children are safe? What is the challenge in terms of implementing what you already have?
It's a good thing you said it's the Ministry of Interior, not the Department of Children's Services, because that's where it's supposed to be. But unfortunately, that money does not go into children. So there's a policy that every police station should have what we call child protection units. But in reality, there are like 2 in the whole country. The rest are not functional. Okay, they say there are gender desks in the police station, but those gender desks are not well equipped. So I'm actually looking at the budget, looking for that, and it's not there. Okay, you can see that security has been given the highest amount of money. So you start asking yourself, where are priorities here? Okay, where we have and I think it's I to say there's been an increase in child abuse. Okay, the Violence Against Children report last year, 2019, was launched in July last year, shows an increase. Okay, we have missing children. Okay, increase in trafficking. Okay, increase in online abuse. But we have a dedicated police unit that is just dedicated to, they are trained to just deal with children. Okay, so but we have money for this to ensure that our kubwas are well secured. Okay, so you start wondering, where is the priority? Okay, and for me, if I would request, if someone is watching this somewhere, my request is, in that big, huge budget for security, we are not asking for a lot of money. We are asking for 5% of that money to go to ensure that we have functional child protection units, at least one per county. So if a child is in conflict or in contact with the law, okay, they are not going to be mixed up with adults. Okay, they have a place where they can be able to, like, if they are lost, because a lot of missing children, they find themselves in police posts, okay, but they are mixed up with people, and then with adults, and you find that these children, they end up being violated. Okay, and then they will be hula baloo, oh, that child was violated, oh, and then another case, and it's just that the only mistake that child did is becoming a vulnerable child. Okay, and they found themselves in the police station, and it becomes a hula baloo thing. So my urge is to government that just 5% to ensure that we have functional child protection units in every county, in that huge budget that has been allocated to Ministry of Interior. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Jennifer. The other day we were discussing about why doesn't Kenya have a ministry for children that is specific to children. You know, having at least close to a half of the population, and we don't have a ministry for it. We don't have any direct body that is in contact with children. That's a huge challenge. Mr. Bonyo, we were discussing with you on that. I wanted to elaborate and explain to the citizens, to people watching this conversation, where the Department of Children is hidden, and whether it's even a department or just a unit under a department.
I think, Collins, I want to go back to what our Constitution provides. We have the rights of children clearly provided for. And before we talk about which department, I think it's important to clarify that those rights are being implemented across various ministries and departments. Pick the right to education, for example. You begin to see national government as a component of education, primarily moving forward, and then county government as a component of pre-primary education. When you go to health, right to health, we have the Ministry of Health here at national level, and also have county government departments for health. When you go to the right to food, you begin to see the right to food being addressed through several ways, trying to ensure that we have water for irrigation, for food production before we get the food. So it's important to look at it from coordination of children's services as opposed to the Department for Children's Services. Because sometimes when you say the Department for Children's Services, the public are struggling. The public are wondering, does it mean all children issues are in one department? I think for me, we may need to look at how should children's services be coordinated. Education is a service for children. When you're providing education services, you're providing a service for children. When you're providing health services, you're providing a service for children. So instead of talking about the way the government is organized, instead of talking about Department for Children without clearly bringing what it does, in my view, the current Department for Children, a lot of what they do is child protection. So rather than call it Department for Child Protection, that for me would make sense. And therefore, if we can agree to begin to shift this conversation to the public and help the public begin to see the Department for Children Services as they know it is largely child protection. Look at the sub-county level. The Department for Children Services at the sub-county level is headed by a sub-county chief officer. What service do they provide? They provide child protection service, right? And they provide it from a prevention point of view and then response. So in my view, the bigger thing is, can children's services be properly coordinated? And where can they be coordinated very well? You know, the National Council for Children's Services, but there are challenges. One of the challenges we have, that's where I want to get back to what you asked me, is that the way the government is organized, state departments that are led by principal secretaries have an upper hand in negotiating for resources. Department of Children's Services, as we know it, and the National Council for Children's Services are not at the level of resource negotiation. And like some say, the program-based budget provides an opportunity for departments to develop programs, sub-programs with outcomes, outputs, and targets. So what happens, Department for Social Protection, Department of Children's Services is not even a program, it's at a delivery unit level. National Council for Children's Services is a delivery unit level. So their placing does not give them the clout, does not give them the visibility. So if we get to the level where the country will have a principal secretary specific to children matters, then we'll be doing very well. I think it's something that we need to look beyond this budget conversation. But let me give you a bigger challenge. As we talk about the Department of Children's Services, at the local level, Jennifer and Sam are talking about various violations that require immediate response and assistance. These guys do not have resources. They largely depend on development partners' resources. And yes, the budget was read, and this is the moment we don't need to struggle to look for, do we want more resources right now? But can we look at what has been allocated, how will it be used properly? An example I want to give you specifically. We have 320 million allocated for within the State Department for Gender under a program known as gender-based, I think gender mainstreaming. But if you look at the targets, there are only three things. It's talking about training of duty bearers. Thereafter, they talk about sensitization of duty bearers. And you begin to ask yourself what's the difference between those two. The third thing they say, establishing a gender-based violence recovery center. Look at 320 billion. So we have an opportunity now to run to that department and say, you have 320 billion. Can we now discuss how we can use it to prevent violence and response? So it's important not just to look at, did the budget increase? But we also must ask ourselves, whatever was allocated, can we quickly engage with this department to shape how it's going to be utilized?
All right, thank you, Mr. Bonyo. I'll go back to Mr. Samuel. Looking at yesterday's budget, you look at it and you see universal health care had been allocated 7 billion, food and nutrition security 60 billion. Then we have affordable housing 13.9 billion, which these are things that directly relate to children. Now, for example, food and nutrition security. How does this translate to or helping a child in the grassroots?
Thank you. And maybe just that we don't forget, I'm sure we can provide statistics later, that over time we've actually seen an increment on matters that affect children in terms of budgeting. And this that you're mentioning is very critical. I think it was during the party's time, it was very loud that wealth is the excess of the food you have. So if we can have more households that are not struggling with food, for sure that is going to be very critical. But then you realize that during the COVID period, there were very obvious challenges that emerged on why we even needed to reopen schools. One of them was the fact that a number of children in very poor households, it's at the school is the only place that they had a meal, perhaps for the whole day. And I must say it's really an embarrassment knowing that from the independence of this country, we've always said we were supposed to fight poverty, hunger, So I think this is definitely a good move to allocate this. We need to be able to follow it up in asking ourselves, are there allocations that will enable such most vulnerable households and communities to make sure that school feeding programs do work? I think that is really a good opportunity to ensure that there is no child who dies out of hunger. But also to build on, we shouldn't see what we did about things about 10 years now, when we had to mobilize money and go and invest into irrigation programs or the same kind of projects that came and disappeared, and we were now selling a bag of maize at over 1 million shillings because of almost just the corruption that is there. So I think the important bit of this is to ask ourselves, where is this money going to? Are there projects that we are not starting and leaving hanging? I'll give you an example. I remember reading back in the year 2000, a project that was signed by World Bank to do irrigation and water dams along the Banzoia to avoid the flooding that happened in Budalangi. That loan facility was maturing after 3 years. Who is going to pay that? The child who is today about 20 years. In the next 12 years, as they get into the market, into the job market, they'll start paying for that bill. Graduating any dams upstream, there's none. So you can see that the element of ensuring that programs don't get stuck and being white elephants really is the role that we all have to play, citizens and even as civil society.
Jennifer, you have mentioned about it's not just about having money and projects, but we are looking at the outcome. Now, for you, what does this mean when we hear about food and nutrition, billion, affordable housing at 13 billion, and universal healthcare 7.7 billion? Because especially the affordable housing, well, you realize that most of these projects are done in urban areas. Do we say that children from maybe vulnerable children in villages, in communities have been considered in such a scenario? Jennifer.
Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. I'm actually looking at this budget and I'm asking myself, where is the budget for playgrounds? Okay, because there is a right to play. If you come to Nairobi, you find it's a whole concrete jungle where the children play. Okay, so and also someone told me it's very important for us when we are budgeting for hardware. Hardware is the buildings, is the housing, it is all these things. We are seeing how Uhuru Highway looks like right now. It's crazy, right? And Mombasa Road. Where is the software? How are we empowering young people, children, to be able to take care of this? Or do we want to have China to stay here for 30 years to maintain the system? Okay? Because you have not been trained, because you don't have a strong education foundation to be able to sustain this. Okay? So that, as some say, 30 years from now, a child who is not born or is going to be born today, 30 years from now, they can still maintain the roads that are being built right now. How are we empowering our software? Okay? And software, as I'm saying, it's the play, right to play, okay? Health, okay? Mental health, okay? Education, okay? Accountability. So as we look at the hardware, I am all for the housing because it's right to housing and right to shelter. But what comes after the so what? The so what, that is the most important question. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Jennifer. Let me come back to Annette. I'll ask you the same question. When you look at these priorities that have been placed here, when you look at universal healthcare 11.7 billion, and food nutrition 60 billion, affordable housing 30 billion. Jennifer mentioned something about where are playgrounds for children. For example, in Nairobi, we realized that almost close to every field has been planned, to be honest. And I know one of our colleagues here, one of the journalists here who did a story about playgrounds. Actually, it's an award-winning story. Probably you might share that later on. What is your take on this? Yes, we allocate for affordable housing, but we don't see where children are considered in all that.
Thank you so much for that question. How I would want to look at it is in terms of misplaced priorities, because what we are seeing now is allocation towards projects or even programs that in our view do not reflect what the needs of the children are. And to just add on that, what I would say is this common saying where they say, when you're not at the table, then you are the menu. So meaning that you are really not part of that process. You are not part of the decision-making process, meaning your views cannot be put into consideration. And that's what we are seeing being translated in the budget today. It also tells us how much or how important it is to put children at the forefront when it comes to critical decision-making processes, including the policy development, including planning and also budgeting. And maybe to add on to that, we have social accountability, which is very, very common. And why we want to talk about social accountability. I would want to tie social accountability in that and also just define it in a layman's language, that this is social accountability is bridging the gap between what we want as actors, not as children, or even children themselves, vis-a-vis what the government is giving us. And because that is not also happening, or there's no platform for accountability, then we see all these misplaced priorities in the budgeting processes. And so there are a lot of opportunities for different actors, including civil society organizations, and even children given a chance, or if the government actually ensures inclusivity of children in the planning process, and also provides a conducive environment for them to be able to participate in the planning processes. So what we see is that children, all actors in this space, will be able to hold the government accountable to ensure that planning is actually done in a manner that reflects the needs, reflects the priorities of the common wananchi, reflects the needs of the children. So there are so many spaces and different approaches that this can take. For instance, we've seen scorecards. In scorecards, I would want to touch on what Bonyo was saying, that in as much as we see the budget, are we able to follow up the implementation stage? Are we able to follow up on the monitoring stage, to audit, to see that this kind of budget was allocated to us a given program, and at the end of the day or at the end of our quarter, of our reporting period, we're able to see what the government in terms of implementation has been able to do. We have social audits, we have scorecards where we can be able to assess and see that the government is actually putting money into good use, putting money to the intended programs and projects that were planned for in the budget.
Right, thank you. Mr. Bonyo, do you think is the government placing money at the right place? Especially in terms of what we are looking at, the universal healthcare. Like now I'm looking at it, education has been allocated 503 billion, though it's not really, it has not been broken down to what and what to cover. Then you look at health, 121 billion. Sorry, that is the children welfare, which is under the social protection.
Thank you, colleagues. Is government putting money in the right amount? Let's remember, normally before a government is formed is a manifesto, political party manifesto. Now, the political party manifesto is where priority setting begins. Like I tell you for sure, what this government is implementing is largely anchored in the political party manifesto of the ruling party. That manifesto then was translated to government policy through various ways. We have the medium-term framework, we have the big four agenda. So is government putting money in the right priority? It should be Priority from whose perspective? Now, from government perspective, they are putting money in the right priority. And they can justify that. From the citizen perspective, it could be different. There's good evidence that government is putting money in the right priority as far as children matters are concerned. Education is prioritized every year because it's a priority for children, and government is putting investment in that. Food is a basic need for everybody. Government is putting money on food security, and of course that's part of the big four agenda, right? Yes, health, government is investing in universal health program. So government is putting money in the right priority. But beyond putting money in the right priority, there's a basic question that sometimes the cabinet secretary fails to appreciate: the targets and the outputs. Right now, everyone is excited. There is more money for food security. But food security for who? Food security for how many people? We need to ask ourselves in the Assam region, for example, how is the investment in food security of 60 billion going to change the situation of people in Assam areas, especially children? How is that going to change the nutrition indicators? How is that going to increase or enhance learning outcomes? Because assuming people have food at home, would they be motivated to go to school? So for me, the priority from government perspective, yes. From the citizen perspective, it could be yes in some instances, no in some instances. I will give you certain basics around this priority question. Go to education. From the children perspective, what is their priority? Now, from government perspective, the priority could be infrastructure in schools. But from the children perspective, the priority could be more teachers. So it's a balancing act. So it's important that we go back to the fundamental question of this government having a conversation with children, so that government can say, from our analysis as a government, this is what we consider priority for you as children. The children are going to say, from our analysis as children, this is what we consider priority. Now, Collins, just to wrap this priority question again, moving forward, citizens have a responsibility now to analyze the budget and check whether their priorities were included. Because if we don't do that as a public, perhaps the priorities are wrong. So our message this morning, and the public now check whether their basic priorities is in the government budget, even before you look at how much money do you have. Remember, we have development partners, and certain things that are done in this country are done by development partners. Sometimes development partners come in to attempt to deal with the gaps that government is able to address. So are the priorities of development partners aligned to priorities of children equally? So as we talk about government, we also have other actors. So the priority question is not just government, is the development partners and the private sector. Are all of us focusing on a shared priority set? Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. There's a question here before we move to the next subject. That is a question from Bishop Consulting, that is on YouTube. They're asking, can we still push for prioritization in favor of children? Can we still push for reprioritization in favor of children? Jenny?
Actually, I would want Sam to cover that.
Okay.
Well, yes, I think, and like we said earlier on, budgeting is a process. There's a process of formulation. And at this stage, while we may not demand that maybe we move a certain ceiling, you know, if a program, say, has been allocated 100 million, you may not be able to say, we want it now to be 120 million. But within it, like Bonya said, exactly what is it being prioritized for? Is the indicator and the outcome that has been put. You know, why must we do so much training? And yet, we could put that money on maybe what will directly impact on children better. Okay, I'll give an example on an area that I also have interest on mental health. We have allocated currently about 300 120 million for training, but the way it's been allocated, it doesn't reflect on structures that will help the common person on the ground to access services better. It's actually very easy to abuse it the way it is. So I think the role we have as civil society, as citizens, is to read the budget. And these things are online. If they're no longer hidden, you can download them and read through. Go to the structure that are there and ensure that even at this lobbying moment where the MPs have a role to be able to say, I think you can shift this, reallocate this, we can make sure our voices are very loud. And beyond that, at implementation, as the tenders are being announced, being able to see what exactly are we asking, we'll be putting them. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Then, as you prepare your question, okay, right, you have something to add?
Thank you. I just also wanted to add that, as he said, the budget making process is a cycle, which means the new budget implementation will begin on 1st of July, but there are opportunities. Normally, I mean, it's become a trend that the government will develop a supplementary budget. In as much as the law is not expressed on public participation during development of a supplementary budget, we have opportunities that we can be able to influence review or revisions into these budgets. This could be through the sector working groups to ensure, or the ministry themselves to ensure that our issues are actually incorporated during the development of supplementary budget. So it's important that as citizens or actors in this space that we look out for those opportunities during the development of supplementary budgets to influence some of the revisions and even decisions that would want.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Before I come to our audience, let me ask Mr. Bode this question. Someone is asking a question here. Are there county level child round table engagements to get their priorities, or do we have this child-centered participation at the local levels?
County level, we have spaces for child participation. We have children clubs in schools. We have the Kenya Children Assembly, that is a sub-county platform and county platform. We have the student government, the student council. The challenge is that they are not effective in as far as functionalities. The reason being, you could have the space for engagement, children clubs or the children assembly, but unless we have investment to make that structure function. So yes, the platforms will be there, but even having those platforms to discuss this budget based on is a challenge, because the sub-county children office, for example, or the area advisory councils, they are supposed to facilitate these platforms to function, have no resources. And I can tell you for sure, an area advisory council at the sub-county level, at the county level, including location, have zero budget in this budget discussion. So on one hand, we are saying the space is low. But if government confirms this budget, will be happy to be shown which program and which budget line was in our analysis. It's not there. So children, they want to participate, the spaces are there, but the mechanisms are not being funded by the government. Apart from that, Collins, I want to go back to what I meant to say. Do we have an opportunity to continue influencing? Yes. I think we have a problem in this country where we are all being boxed that budget has been taken to parliament, it has been approved, the minister has been ready, there's nothing we can do. Colleagues, there's something called a cash flow projection. All government ministries and departments have that. There's something called procurement plan. All these government ministries have that. So when we identify that there's a lot of allocation for trainings, there's something we can do. We have to go and check what were the training needs. Why do we have a culture where every year people must be trained? This budget in 2018, we had trainings for across ministries. So we need to ask ourselves, can we take the budget for trainings and we look at what we need to use it for? So there's an opportunity for shaping that. The second ministry is telling us is that when government talks about supplementary budget, citizens have a responsibility to interrogate what is in this supplementary budget. My view is failure to plan properly will result in supplementary budget. Because if you plan properly, why must you keep on getting to supplementary budget situation? My view is supplementary budget situation should be as a result of the budgets. But if you plan properly, based on the 5-year medium-term plan, based on annual targets, it will shock you that what Sam is saying, and I'm telling this, is available at the ministry website is budget documents. But go to the various other ministries, their websites, their work plans are not there. So Treasury is facilitating access to information or giving us budget documents. But the implementers of the budget are not giving us their work plan. The government financial year is beginning the next 3 weeks, 1st of July. Across all these ministries, run to their websites even today, you're not going to see an annual work plan. So we have an opportunity now to shape the implementation of this budget so that it's used for the right purpose. Thank you.
Right. So Annette, where is it weekly when it comes to access to information? Bodo has mentioned that there is no information available in the departments and ministries. And Mr. Bodo, you had mentioned, Mr. Bodo had mentioned something about whether there is budget for child participation and all that. And the reason as to why he's asking that question is because it's not anywhere. It's not, we cannot access any such information that there is a budget for this. Is that a way of making sure that we are just blinded as citizens of this country?
Thanks. And when we talk of the budgets, one thing the law tells us that if it's not in plan, then it's nowhere. So it means if you've not planned for it, there's no way you're going to cost it. And what we see when it comes to public participation, this is both at the national and the county. No attempts, or if there is, it's very little that is being done in terms of financing public participation. And so we are grappling with this at both the national and the county, and it's a result of this that we're seeing that even management of public participation processes are actually skewed. So when you talk of the weak link as well in terms of access to information, it also depends with what information, how the information is packaged. Today we've looked at, a few of us have had the opportunity to look at the citizen budget. For instance, a child will not sit and say that a citizen budget is out there and I now understand perhaps what the budget or the contents of the budget are. Even if maybe I was not a practitioner in this space, in the PFM space, I would not really understand what those figures are. So when we talk of access to information, in my view, it should be user-friendly. It should be child-friendly. How do we ensure that we simplify this information that to a level where a child can be able to consume it, can be able to use it, can be able to use it to even make decisions on matters budget. So access to information is actually today, and it touches so many components of the planning processes. It can either facilitate or even hinder how public participation is done. For instance, what we've seen as a common practice is that people are invited for public participation, then during the meetings, you are issued like maybe 100 page document to be able to use it and at the same time have a meaningful public participation from it. Is that possible? Yeah. And by somebody doing that, in my view, they are trying in a way to buy from meaningful participation. So you will be in that room, yes, but at the end of the day, are you able to contribute substantively to the topic that is being discussed in that room? So there are so many aspects when we talk of access to information that really needs to be looked at by responsible authorities to ensure that public participation in this country is meaningful, to ensure that public participation favors children.
All right, thank you very much. And let me now go to our audience. There was a hand somewhere. Yes, kindly help me get this mic. Yes, please ask your question.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. My name is Thomas Mire. I'm a journalist from Habari Kibra Kibera. My question goes to Annette. Perhaps from where you sit, and just like from me as a parent and also as a community journalist, early this week was having an interview with some parents in Kibera, and especially the ones who have teen girls who just gave birth like around 2 weeks ago. All of them are underage. And we have seen like in the case like in the news, social media, like how kids are even like attacking teachers in schools because of school fees arrears. Perhaps as a ministry, maybe the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Finance, and during this COVID time, would this be an ideal time for them to think about, can we give parents maybe a 1 year waiver, school fees waiver, so that all kids can go to school and we don't have these cases coming up now? Do you still have that chance to speak and give parents a waiver, even if it's just a term, and ensure that all kids are going to school? Because these kids now, they are teen mothers, they are
killing themselves left, right, and center. We have seen issues of mental health. And it's not only the children. If your parent is affected, mental health, if your parent's mental health is an issue, then basically this will trickle down to the children. So in my view, what I also expected is that perhaps as the government is coming up with a response and also planning for the same, that there needs to be maybe a blueprint, there needs to be an assessment that ought to have been done to understand what is the situation at hand, what issues need to be addressed urgently within our budget. Because the other thing we note with the budgets is that for instance, when you talk of the national budget, it's informed by the MTEF, the medium-term economic framework, expenditure framework. So basically, creating a room, for instance, now that we are living in the COVID era, was to actually bring on board priorities that were not initially factored into the budget. It is an emergency, and because it's an emergency, what we need to be seeing across different sectors is responding to the urgent needs. For instance, mental health, for instance, maybe waiving as you say. And is that what we are seeing in the budget? Unfortunately, that is not the case. And now that we're talking of opportunities, as Bonyo has said, there are opportunities for us to even talk to different ministries to ensure that maybe perhaps when they begin developing the supplementary budget, they're able to factor in this. Yes.
All right, thank you. Let's have the next question from, yes.
Thank you. My name is Henrik Sokuchuni. I work for a community radio station called Pamoja FM, the voice of Cuba. I'll start with Samuel. Samuel, is our constitution friendly to children? If no or yes, what are the gaps? Then I'll move to, no, Samuel, this is Obonyo. Obonyo, that's your question. Sorry for that. Samuel, over to you. I'm looking at the budgets of different countries in East Africa. So I'm looking at Uganda, Tanzania, Burundi, Rwanda. Unfortunately, Kenya's budget is the highest or most expensive. So if you make a comparison of these four countries, which country is more friendly to children? And is this informed by how expensive your budget is? Then I'll move to Jennifer. Jennifer, unfortunately, in all this discussion, I've not heard anything on pads for girls. Food, shelter, clothes are basic needs, but I wish food, shelter, clothes, and pads was a basic need to the girl child. Then I'd want the four of you also to rate yesterday's budget on a scale of 1 to 10. What would you give it on how friendly it is to the children? Even as you rate it, I'd also want you to now focus on the positive things, because I've had, somehow most of the comments from your discussions tend to, but I would want, what are the good things that you can pick from yesterday's budget read by Kuriatan? Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. And of course, by the way, you mentioned about I think there has been an improvement in terms of budgeting for children when he started discuss sometime back. Yes, let's start with Mr. Bonyo.
Thank you. Yes, the Constitution is friendly for children. Now, what we need to be doing moving forward is enabling our children to understand the Constitution. The Constitution is friendly to children. What we have not done is enabling children to understand the Constitution. Because we have no programs specifically for civic education for children. We have civic education so much in the adult population. So if we got civic education for our children, then we develop civic education materials in a child-friendly or child-relevant content, then the children will be able to appreciate the Constitution. Now, you're also asking, you are worried that perhaps what you're saying might not be bringing out what is positive. It is important we say things that they are. Read again the budget statement as was read yesterday. If you're using a computer, you go and look the PDF statement and click Control F and look for the word children and tell me how many times you find it. Let's start from there. You only find it twice. I can tell you in that statement, and that for me allow me to just bring what I think needs to be had. The statement appreciates that the government of Kenya has presented disaster risk management bill to Parliament, and the minister is asking Parliament to fast track that bill. But the same minister is aware the same government has presented the children bill to Parliament and is failing to appreciate that. I mean, how else do you want me to express it? We have the same executive presenting disaster management bill to Parliament. The CS Treasury acknowledges that bill in the statement and requests Parliament to fast track it. But the same CS is aware there's a children bill in Parliament, but he fails to appreciate that in the statement. Children Agenda Forum and joining forces. Some will tell you, we engaged and presented these recommendations, and we expected the CS to pronounce himself for the children bill. He didn't do that. So the good things government knows, that's what they presented. We are reminding government of the things they did not present because the good things they already know. So reminding them of the gaps they didn't present. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Are you satisfied? Oh, okay, that's in a scale of 1 to 10.
I'll give it 6.
All right. Thank you. Let's move to the next person. That was Mr. Samuel.
Yeah.
Your question.
Thank you. I want to remember the name. Thank you. So a very good question you're asking. I think if I hear you are asking, does how big your budget reflect how friendly you are to children? I think this is like those ones where the test for the pudding, what do you say it? We will know how nice something is when we test it ultimately. So what are the outcomes? And of course, like Bonyo said, budgets depend on what the government priorities are. We've had a government of Jubilee plus same people the last 10 years now. So the results should be very clear. We will see it in whether we are reducing the cases of children who are dying, at early stages. How many is enrollment rate increasing and all that. And of course, there's been a number of child-friendly index that have been done across the region. Countries like Rwanda are definitely doing much better than we are. And a lot of this is in being able to implement the policies. I think that is one place that Rwanda is very different from us. I'll give you a very good case study. In Rwanda, 10 years ago, they had over, I want to get the figures right, but we had over 90, I think about 90 children homes. Now they just about 4. Why? Because they had a work plan, they had a policy, and they implemented it. So I think the thing where our government misses and where then we don't end up being child-friendly as a country to the point where we are put in our policy is the ability to implement. But overall, of course, we must acknowledge that you rightfully say that there are certain things that we've done pretty well, like the way we've treated our girls. I think we've improved over time, and of course, there's room to make it better. There was another question.
Rating. You rate.
Oh, overall, the rating of the budget. Well, I think I'm almost where Bonyo is. Yeah, I think about the 6 is fair in the sense that it's growth, but we are all worried about the debts that we're being left with, because the impact of that will directly come back to children and families. So the ability to borrow loans will be very difficult. If they're going to borrow again another almost 900 billion, it means going back to the banks. It means the bank don't consider me as a priority lender. So I cannot build my house that I'm supposed to do. I can't borrow and pay school fees where I'm supposed to. So ultimately, I think that must be corrected. And like we say, we must ask ourselves, what have we budgeted for? It's not that we put 300 million, it is for what? I think that aspect, it's our job to make sure that's done better.
Wow. Now, Jennifer, the issue of sanitary towels. That's a very emotive issue.
It is. Considering, I think 2 weeks ago, there's a huge story about girls selling themselves because of sanitary towels, which is unfortunate because, again, this year we were hoping with a lot of campaign that we did about for last month or so, we're hoping we are going to get zero-rated sanitary towels. Unfortunately, not. It did not happen this year because I would argue, as someone argued, why should we give condoms for free and we don't give sanitary towels for free? Is it because one act is more superior than the other? When one is normal, the other one you can live without. It's arguable. So anyway, so for the positive side, I am super happy. I was saying, if you're a mom and you've ever bought diapers, this budget was a sign of relief, because right now I think, and that's the unfortunate thing, because now girls are using diapers for sanitary towels because diapers are super cheap. Okay, it's because a pack of for 100 shillings you can get quite a number of diapers for children. Okay, because they are zero-rated. So how do I rate the government? Before I do that, I just want to add what Sam was saying on terms of child friendliness vis-a-vis budget. So a report by SCPF shows that, unfortunately, the richer you are, the more unfriendly you are to children. Okay, that's our whole research on its own. Okay, so Kenya is the richest country in Eastern Africa, but not the most friendly to children. And that's highly because we do not implement. We have very good policies. Actually, people like places like Rwanda, they don't even bother hiring consultants and doing workshops. They just come to Kenya and they get our documents and they implement them in their countries. Okay? Because we have very good documents, but we do not implement them. Okay? So, so how can we be more friendly? Is taking those small steps. Okay? We have seen an increase in budget, but we need to start interrogating, like, for example, why did we give 0.9 billion to a state corporation known as the Social Welfare Society of Kenya? While if you go to see the budget that is the Federal Department of Children's Services, it's not the same. Okay? It's way less than that. Okay? And you check National Council for Children's Services, which is supposed to be a coordinating body for children's services. It coordinates all the ministries that have to do. It has less than 100 million Kenya shilling. Yes, I've seen eyebrows. Yes, it has less than 100 million Kenya shillings in their budget. How are they supposed to police other ministries like Ministry of Education, Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Interior, National Interior, when they have less money? It's if you have the money, you are able to box people around. But now, and STS, they have very small money, they cannot be able to monitor that. So if you're going to be child friendly, we have to start looking at some of these things. Okay, how are we? If you're saying we are going to end FGM by the year 2022, it's a declaration by the President of Kenya. Where is that budget? If you go to the anti-FGM, well, how much money were they given this year? Is it enough? Okay, or are they waiting for World Vision, UNFPA, UNICEF to support them to go for these trips or to hold all these meetings? Okay, we have to be child friendly. We have to take steps. Thank you so much. How do I rate? Okay, I'll go at because of the diapers, I'll go at 6.2.
All right, thank you very much. Because of the dimension, even 6.2, so average there is 6. Now, do you have any other question? Oh, okay, sorry, Annette.
Wait, because yeah, in terms of rating, I'll go with 5. And I think for my case, I look at the bigger picture. So, in as much as we have a 3.3 trillion budget, the question is, where is the huge chunk of money going? And this is going into repayment of debts. And then let us also look at the recurrent budget versus the development budget. Again, we ask ourselves, when we talk of the development budget, is it sufficient to provide services to the common man or to the common wananchi? I'll again ask, when you look at that budget, we are seeing a lot of resources going into infrastructure development. Again, how long will it take for us to see returns from this infrastructure? In my view, I expect, especially at this particular point in time, that most of the resources are channeled towards what I would call the software. Employment of health personnel, teachers, training them, and all that. So I'll give it a 5.
All right, thank you.
Just allow me to show you what emphasize what you say. For the issue of sanitary towels, last year the Ministry of Education indicated that there were some resources for sanitary towels that were given to class schools, but it wasn't enough. But if you look at the budget documents in Parliament, we couldn't see allocation of sanitary towels. So I think what we want to do that question, we may now want to interrogate whether this year again is some allocation and for how many cars will be reached. Our estimation is that we need an annual allocation of 3.6 billion for all the cars in need of sanitary towels to be reached for 12 months. So anything less than 3.6 billion clearly demonstrates that they will not be reached. Then tied to that, the issue of national plans for student services. I think this is an area that needs to be looked at, because ideally, we do not have an annual consolidated status report on children in Kenya every year. Reason being, the agency called NCCS does not have resources for comprehensive monitoring and evaluation to develop an annual report for children. So here we are talking about children matters, and the only place you can find data around progress for children is for different ministries. Ministry of Education will give you their data, Ministry of Health will give you their data, Ministry of Water will not give it to you. Ministry of Water will have the proportion of people who are having access to water, but they do not bring it at the level of children. So I think that the issue of NCCS, we need to take this further and look for a special fund to commission a major evaluation. Now, the Africa Committee of Experts, when they gave their concluding observations to Kenya, I think by January, they recommended to Kenya government to do a national assessment on the effects of COVID. If NCCS do not have resources to do that, clearly already the recommendation from the Africa Committee of Experts on the Rights of Children will not be implemented. Last year, the head of state gave a report to Parliament on how Kenya is complying with international obligations. Among the international obligations is the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. Now, if you look at the piece that was within the president's statement, it missed data. We have systems, child protection information management system, national orientation management system. These systems are not functional because there's no investment to ensure the systems function to get us data for us to comprehensively report on this. So yes, we are talking about budgeting for children, but the basic link where is the data that informs how we can improve on budgeting for children? Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I think we are out of time, but I want to please give her microphone so that she can ask her question. Yes, please. It's okay, yes.
My name is Bridget Faida from Consolation East Africa. I think some of my concern has been, just a part of my concern has been him, because I was asking, is there, let's say, a department within the government that can do a follow-up on, let's say, social auditing after the allocation? Because each and every year, they have allocated for, let's say, for the nutrition and food and nutrition, but each and every year we kind of hear some kind of information or news that in the eastern part of Kenya, there are children suffering with malnutrition, and then they kind of come up with a system where they say we have to kind of changa or something like that. Then I wonder if they have allocated some funds for children or for food and nutrition, then those people within the eastern part of the Kenya, or let's say the northern part of Kenya, the Lodwar people or whatever, they should not be suffering at that moment. And also, at the end of the year, we should also be getting kind of a report, maybe the way you have said, from each and every ministry, and it should show us as to how those allocations have been maybe spent or something like that, so that we could not be having such kind of always information on corruption or something like that.
All right, thank you very much for your question. I think we don't have any other question from our audience. All right. I think I'll give Mr. Samuel to react on that. Then give some comments on COVID-19, children and COVID-19.
Thank you, Bridget, for coming and that concern. Well, we appreciate that when an allocation is being done, say for food and nutrition or irrigation, that maybe the outcome will take a while. I think it's a bit foolhardy for our governments to not plan. We sort of know that there's a certain month or a certain pattern that we can see of drought, for example. At the same time, we know that it's going to be floods after that. There's a time I was doing some children work and driving, moving between Mandera going to Wajir. There's a whole section that has almost a very natural water. It becomes swampy. I would just imagine what it will take if either the county government or the national government put in 100 million to make that a proper water plan, and how much that will affect the number of people who will benefit from making sure they're not fighting over water and their pasture, the amount of irrigation you can do around that. Just a water plan, and that will go a long way. And yet we need to raise much more money to respond, to money, putting trucks on the road to go and give food, which is even inhuman, and again is the current practice of how you're supposed to do humanitarian support. So I think we need to go back to our role in the planning process. Let us audit what is the priority that has been done. Have we targeted pockets or places where this has happened before? The other day, someone did a review of the previous money that we collected through Red Cross. Was it about 3 billion or 2 billion? And most of the projects that were initiated through that to do irrigation completely collapsed. They did not follow through. But it is because we are coming from this Serikali idea instead of a rights-based approach where we say, we've paid taxes, can we prioritize and do this incrementally? So I think let's have an eye for the planning, because if we are not part of the planning, then let us not regret when the budgets come. And you will see that around this month, there's a lot of activity of training happening in governments. Why? You want to burn the money. Then next month again, you say we do not have the money. So it really boils down to our ability to engage. On COVID, I think is a very critical point. Last year we engaged in processes of asking ourselves, are we really responding properly in terms of ensuring that the majority of people who are even at a greater risk are being supported? It's unfortunate that even funds that we've received and gifts have disappeared in COVID. Yet, the things that are going to stay with us longer, things like the increase in teenage pregnancies, things like mental health that we talked about, are barely being thought about. So I think we haven't generally done very well in thinking about what the immediate response that needs to be done and in the long term. And I think while there's some money now that has been allocated for our own vaccine, we really must get to a country that is proud of ourselves. We can't wait for donation of things like vaccines. How do we ensure that we have capacity within our systems to be able to respond to such? So generally, I think our response on COVID really has a lot that needs to be done. Lastly, on the same COVID matter, maybe I can give a parting shot as we finish, is COVID has shown us that all the countries that have done better are those that have built systems. The same thing is going to happen. There's going to be another disaster, another emergency situation. We will respond in as well as we have invested in our system. So let's approach our investment in children from a systems approach also. Let's be able to ask ourselves, are we having enough human resource, social workforce? I know there's a bill, I don't know how far it's gone. Those are the things we need to ask ourselves. Are we also building capacity for organizations like NCCS? So let's do a system approach to things that we are not being reactive and not seeing symptoms. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. So Jennifer, next to you, just give us a comment on COVID-19 and children, because looking at the budget, other countries, let me say developed countries, and countries that have systems already are planning about having vaccines for children, and we haven't heard about this.
Currently, we are conducting a study on voices of children, and one of the questions is on COVID-19. And children are very unhappy about COVID-19. Okay, they say they are very unhappy about COVID-19, and it has impacted their lives. They have lost an eighth of their childhood. Can you imagine? Of their lives, actually. If you've lost, it's 1 year. And we're not even back to normal, you can say that, because like we had a forum with children in April, and said we can't go to Funky, we can't go play our children, we are losing our child. I think Sam knows that conversation with children. What defined their childhood is basically lost. Okay, that is the impact of COVID-19 on children. They have lost their childhood. 2 years is an eighth of someone's life. If you are to live for 80 years, you've lost an eighth of your life because of COVID-19. So, as government, we should take that into consideration, that children have lost their lives. Okay, they have lost their childhood, and it is important for us to start thinking on how we can be able to start building into it. Okay, how can we start recovering that? Okay, so that's for me a challenge. For government to start thinking how we can start recovering childhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Annette, to you. Let's comment on COVID-19 and COVID-19 and children. So give us your first remarks.
When we talk of COVID-19, I think I've spoken about that before. That because of COVID-19, because of this pandemic, we have seen the new trends. We have seen, for instance, I mentioned that increased number of teenage pregnancies, mental health issues, so many things that have affected children negatively, that in my view also should shape how government actually plans or responds in addressing such issues. For instance, I keep on asking myself, is it high time right now that the government thinks of introducing maybe sexual reproductive health education in schools, so that these children can be able to just understand, I mean, what they need or how they need to carry themselves around. And this, was actually perpetrated or escalated during this pandemic season. So, in summary, what I'm saying is that we are seeing new trends as a result of COVID-19 that have affected our children differently, socially, morally, all those aspects. So, requiring a different dimension or reevaluating how we plan for them. And then in terms of my parting shot, I would say is that government, again, needs to invest in the future. Failure to do that, I don't know what future we expect if we are not able to invest in these young children at this particular point in time. And as I said, when they are not at the table, then they are the menu. So what future do we expect if we are not investing in them? And as we are talking of cushioning vulnerable groups, we should also put them amongst those groups. So we want to see the government also putting in place different measures to ensure that our children's well-being is actually put into consideration. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Annette. To you, Mr. Bonyo, I think I would like you to mention something as you conclude about monitoring of especially the expenditure in government and also in relation to children matters.
Yeah, thanks, Collins. I just want to mention some 4 key things that require our attention. Monitoring budget. We have a presidential directive 20 FGM by 2022. Budget allocated to the TFGM board is 102 million, against an expectation of 500 million per year. That's important to note. But the presidential directive, if you look at it, as far as resource allocation is concerned to the TFGM board to ensure FGM is ended in 2022, it could be a problem. We have another presidential directive on allocating funding to schools with special needs. Look at what's allocated to children, to schools that provide services to special needs. Against that presidential directive, there's a problem. That thing, the government of Kenya launched the Violence Against Children National Prevention Response Plan. Very detailed plan. All strategies to end violence against children in that plan. In the budget that we're discussing now, that plan has not been funded. So we're in a situation where, on one hand, there's a commitment plan to end violence against children, but that commitment has no resource allocation. Lastly, we have resources for school feeding 1.8 billion in fine. 1.8 billion can only feed 320,000 children in 1 year against a population of close to 10 million children. So clearly, we are going to have children going to school and they will not be having school feeding. Now, in terms of monitoring budgets, we have the Office of the Controller Budget that gives a quarterly budget implementation report. We need to start from there. Let's not hurry into tracking this budget and forget the previous budgets. The Controller Budget has budget implementation reports. We are doing budget, a number of ministries are not spending. The absorption rate is low, national and county governments. So let us trace the reports from Controller Budget. Find out why certain departments are not spending. And for those that are spending, let us now go to the community and find whether these services were actually provided. So that from paper, let's go and check. Let's ask children, those investments, did this investment reach you?
All right, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for this conversation. I think we've covered every area or most of the areas that are related to children. Remember, this conversation continues. It doesn't end here. We are continuing this conversation on social media at Mtoto News. That is at the Twitter handle for Mtoto News, at Joining Forces Alliance, Joining Forces KE, that is then at Colin Sorono, that is my social media handle. Thank you very much for joining us. Mr. Samuel Wamuiji, sorry for that. The name is a bit, no, forgive me for that. Mr. Samuel, thank you for joining us today. Ms. Jennifer Kaberi from Total News. And here, Annette Asante Sana for joining us today. And at my far end is Mr. Elijah Bono from the Joining Forces Alliance. Thank you very much, our audience, for joining us today and being able at least to participate in this conversation. To you who is watching us, thank you very much for keeping tuned, and let's continue this conversation, and let's continue engaging to make sure that the rights of children are protected and we avoid maybe the dangers that might affect our children moving forward. Thank you very much. My name is Colin Sorono. Have a good afternoon.